KKHT wants you to meet three of the classiest guys in real estate.
I am Chris Kelso, the maestro of mortgage.
I am Rob Cook, the godfather of real estate.
And I'm Joe Orsack, the king of credit swing. And together, we're the Real Estate Rat Pack. Much like us, real estate right now is smoking hot. So whether it's buying, selling, or owning, you need to check out the Real Estate Rat Pack.
They're here to take your calls and answer your questions live. Call now, 1-800-808-5548. And now, the Real Estate Rat Pack.
Good morning, good morning. We don't have two people in the studio today. We've got about 7. And missing today in action is our own Chris Kelso. And I know he's on his way back. And also Joe Orsack, who's out playing again today. So I've replaced them with two amazing, powerful women, and also beautiful. And they are in the studio right now. Right next to me is Jackie Bally. Good morning, Jackie.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And so tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
All right. So my name is Jackie Bally. I have a consulting firm in political engagement, public affairs, and marketing. And I also have a show on Fox, and we talk about the latest political action items. And we're going to talk about this guy sitting to my left.
Yes, Mr. Bill King's in the house, as they say. So, and anyway, that's on Channel 26, and it airs at
every Sunday morning from 6 to 8.
6 to 8.
Yes, yes.
I may have to put it on DVR.
Yeah, that's all right.
Anyway, and also sitting to the left of Mr. Bill King is our own from Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, Anderson Properties, our own Samantha Merritt. Welcome.
Thank you for having me back. This is such an honor.
Yes, well, you've always done such a great job, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to come meet our next mayor.
Yes.
So, anyway, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a realtor, like you said, with Berkshire Hathaway Anderson Properties. My business is centric around investors and builders and urban development, so I'm very excited to talk to you.
Yeah, well, a lot of things. The thing about cities, it's a lot about services, and when you're getting involved with urban development and new home construction, which you do.
Yes.
You get to deal with the city quite a bit.
Oh, yes, I do. Yes, I do. I talk to them frequently. I know the ladies at the permit office.
And so now we're going to have our new best friend who's going to help us all through that permitting process. We have mayoral candidate Bill King. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Hey, good morning, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're very excited. This is a very different format from what we normally do because we usually are just cutting up and talking about real estate. But as I was telling Jackie yesterday, everything that the city does impacts real estate.
Everything
Sure does. So tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, what you do, how you got here, and then we're going to lead on into your campaign.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised down in Kemah, and grew up down in that area. Went to Clear Creek High School. My father was union pipe fitter. Worked my way through the University of Houston. Went to law school at night.
Go Cougs.
And
yeah, that was go Cougs.
Yeah. And got out, and this is America's city of opportunity. I mean, there's these incredible opportunities every place in this town if you're willing to work hard and get a good education. And so the city's been great to me, but I'm concerned about the direction. So that's why I'm running for mayor.
Well, we actually have a caller right now, and so if you put your headsets on, we can have to hear what he has to say. Chris, are you there? Chris. Well, did we lose our caller?
You there?
Oh. I got you now.
You got me now.
I got you now. So anyway, well, I hope you're having a good time, and I hope you're on your way back.
I am on my way back. I'll be back in full force next week for everybody.
Outstanding. Well, we miss you, and we're ready for you to be home. Anyway.
Well, I'll tell you, I miss everybody as well, but you got a great show going on there today. Get Mr. King in the house, and the two beautiful ladies along with them. So
I'm thinking. That sound you're hearing is your contract expiring.
That was good.
So, anyhow, I know you had a couple of questions for Bill, so fire away.
Well, one of the things I think is pretty interesting, and I've always said this, and I'll ask this maybe and then hang up and let Bill continue to answer it, but. Bill, you wrote a book called Unapologetically Moderate, basically. And one of the things I've always said, I classify myself more as a Rockefeller Republican, which is an individual who is economically conservative but socially liberal. And I tell everybody all the time is one of the things that we have in Houston is probably one of the largest melting pots that we have in the United States. And I think it's very important to note that I don't think you can be extremely to one side or the other, whether it be a Democrat or Republican or completely independent, to be able to govern Houston. I think Houston is truly a melting pot that represents a lot of different aspects and both sides of the equation, and I do think there's some stuff that's going on in regards to the finances of Houston that need to be addressed. And so, I'd like to have you, when I hang up, maybe have you talk a little bit about what that means, and I think what that could represent for the Houston mayorship. So,
yeah, I don't know that we have that much time to address all that, but I think we could probably touch on some of that. That's a great question. And that's actually how I came to know Bill King, because that's the first time I ever heard that term, unfunded pensions. And I go, wow. And then I started reading his articles and things like that. I go, this guy knows some stuff.
Yeah,
so,
he does.
and that, again, I think I would describe myself as a, social Democrat and a conservative Republican as far as from fiscal standpoint. So I think that's how you pretty much approach things.
Yeah, so I wrote a column one time that said that if you were more conservative in your views on finances and more progressive on your views on social issues, that you really don't have a political party in this country. I think we had like 100 letters to the editor of people that agreed with that. I frankly have gotten to the point where I hate to even use the words conservative or liberal, because they really don't mean anything anymore. And what I tried to do with the column was, you give me a policy issue, I'll go analyze it, I'll look at the facts, and I'll come back and tell you what my conclusion about is. Then you can put whatever kind of label on that opinion you want. But I just think putting these labels on things are not very useful, and it keeps us from really thinking seriously about the issues.
And do you think the labels actually hurt us because people are trying to put us into this, corner us or pigeonhole us into either liberal or conservative, and you can't be anything different than that?
I think it just makes us lazy. It just makes us not stop and think about the issues. I'm a conservative, so tell me what all the conservative positions are. I'm a liberal, so tell me what all the liberal. I'm not interested in that. I want to look at the facts themselves and try to come to what the best public policy conclusion is. Now, obviously, we're never going to all agree to that, but I think we can have that discussion. You don't have to demonize people that disagree with you. I mean, who in the world do you agree with about everything?
Especially in your race, because it's nonpartisan and it doesn't take a D or R next to your name to fill a pothole. I mean, at the end of the day. So,
I'm part of my stump speech. I end up with, there are no Democratic or Republican potholes. And
right.
When somebody, when a burglar breaks into your house, they don't care if you're a liberal or conservative, whether you're white, black, brown, gay, or straight. They're going to take your stuff regardless. So.
Equal opportunity burglars. Yes.
Getting the city back to the basic services that we expect a municipality to provide is something on which everybody ought to be able to agree on, regardless of their ideological or partisan preferences.
Bill, I've known you 20, 25 years. I don't know how that could be, since I'm only 21.
I know. I can say you.
But
met you when we were 5.
I know, exactly. And it goes back to when you were mayor of Kemah. And a lot of people forget that, because you've been so instrumental in the policy and business in Houston. I would like you to talk a little bit about your experience out there, because you actually brought Kemah to a lot of the economic development things that we're seeing going on in that area. You were instrumental in that. And I actually think you could bring those skills, among other things, to Houston when you're elected. So if you could talk a little bit about your experience and how you can transfer that, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I don't know to what degree the experience is transferable. I mean, Houston wouldn't be a good-sized homeowners association in Houston. But we did go through this sort of remarkable development of the boardwalk, and the Landrish Company, Tillman Ferdinand, came down and really did all that. And I think what I learned in that situation was mostly just to get out of the way and figure out ways to let them do it. The city of Kemah did very little in terms of financial incentives to make that project happen, but we did get out of the way and make it easy for them to do what they wanted to do. As a result, the city had this tremendous increase in revenue and has, last time I looked, 3 or 4 million visitors a year. So it was mostly just about not stifling what private enterprise wanted to do.
Yeah, and it's a destination point down there. It's people go there and they go, let's go to Kemah. There's great restaurants. There's a lot of little shops, and so you pave the way for that. That's important. It's about economic development, because the thing that we always talk about is we need to create more business opportunities. And I think Houston's been a very business friendly town. I think Texas is a very business friendly state. So I think paving the way for that. It's important.
Yeah, I would probably disagree with you a little bit about how business-friendly Houston is, because if you look at what's going on, everybody talks about...
Sure, the guest is arguing with host.
Yeah, but you talk about, the Houston's growing. The truth of the matter is the city's not growing much at all. Almost all the population growth in our region is going outside the city and the county and the surrounding counties. If you live out here on this western quadrant, it seems like things are growing. But I tell you, get into the other three quadrants of the city, and you'd be amazed what you find out there. I was visiting with a minister down in the below the South Loop on Cullen there. He estimates that the population in his neighborhood is down 20 or 30% in the last 10 years. And you go into these neighborhoods and they're hollowing out. They've got a lot of abandoned lots. You've got a lot of they've got thousands of abandoned houses in the town that haven't been torn down. We live a little bit in a bubble over in this western quadrant. The rest of the city's not doing that well.
So what's the result for some situation like that where you've got, suburban flight? So is there anything that you have as a repurposing those type of subdivisions?
Yeah, sure. I think the problem is we're not providing the basic city services to those subdivisions. I was out visiting with a civic club president in a subdivision called Garden Villas, which is just to the northwest of Hobby Airport. And it's a beautiful old subdivision, big lots, big trees on Sims Bayou, but they're under siege. They've got prostitution going on along Telephone Road. They got drug dealing on Belford, which is the north barrier. The streets are almost impassable. They're in such bad condition. They got about a half a dozen abandoned houses, which have become havens for drug addicts and criminals, and also people just stacking up garbage in the middle of the night. And they can't get the city out there to do anything. I mean, they can't get them even to tear down these abandoned houses, which is just, a fairly small amount of money. Yet the city somehow always has money to do the things that it wants to do, like build bus lanes on Post Oaks for $120 million of property tax money, or redo Memorial Park for $300 million. But yet we're not providing those basic services to these neighborhoods, and, they're paying property taxes. It's not fair.
Yeah, well, again, we have the money. It's just a matter of money management, then, is what you're telling me.
Look, the city's going to, I think they announced the other day, the city's budget this year is $5.1 billion. This is not a lack of revenue. Our water and sewer rates in the last 5 years are up 42%. This rain tax that we passed was, in essence, the largest property tax increase in the city's history. And I would bet that none of your listeners' appraisals have gone down in the last 5 years.
No, we have a lot of appraisal issues, yeah.
And last year, the city collected $132 million more in property taxes than it collected the year before. And yet we can't balance our budget and we can't provide basic services. We have 300 fewer police officers on the street than we had 10 years ago. This is a road like Detroit went down. Now, we're not Detroit. I'm not saying that. But these are choices that you make and the services you're going to provide or not provide.
Now, we still have a good bond rating, and we're paying our bills, and we have revenues. So it really is a matter of getting city council and the new mayor coming in to reapportion where the money goes.
Yeah, this is prioritizing what's important in the city.
And then, of course, what you're telling me is, I think the first time I heard you do on a campaign trail was, most people want to talk about, potholes. And I guess that's because everybody can relate to them. I hit 2 coming up here today, and I think, Samantha, you hit a couple coming up. And
the
Jackie,
infrastructure here is horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, and we do need to talk about potholes.
And we do have that terrible alluvial soil. Basically, it's soil that's brought in by rivers, and it's just clay. And, of course, it expands and cracks at a drastic rate.
But that's not new.
But every city has these challenges. We don't have snow and salt. I mean, every city's got its own challenges on the street. But I'm going to tell you, I've been here my whole life. I've never seen our streets in as bad a condition as they are. It is an embarrassment.
It's ridiculous.
It looks like a third world country. I have a good friend who recruits over at the medical center, and he said they're having a hard time recruiting people because when they bring them in and drive them around town, it's such an embarrassment.
So, when I hear that music in the background, that means we probably need to take a break and let our advertiser pay for the show. So we will be right back.
Me's an old immovable object like me. You can bet as sure as
Welcome back to the Real Estate Rat Pack Radio Show with Chris, Joe, and Rob. The crew is taking your calls, so dial in at 1-800-808-5548.
And we are back. I'm here with Jackie Bally, Samantha Merritt, and our mayoral candidate, Bill King. So welcome back. We were talking about infrastructure, and of course, one of your campaign things is get back to basics. Tell us what that looks like.
Well, we organize municipal government for basically two things, and that's to build the infrastructure out and to provide public safety. And the city's doing a pretty terrible job on both of those right now. The streets we talked about earlier, there's all kinds of problems with flooding, as we've seen recently. There's also tremendous problems with our wastewater treatment system, which you're going to be hearing more about in the near future. But on the public safety side, we now have a burglary every 15 minutes in this city. And yet the Houston Police Department reported last year that they only solved 8% of the burglaries. We were proclaimed the robbery capital of the world robbery capital of the United States a couple of weeks ago by the Houston Chronicle, and yet the Houston Police Department reports that they only solve 20% of the robberies that are committed. Those numbers are not acceptable, and if criminals know that they have got a 92 or 80% chance of getting away with it, what's the deterrent?
No,
Well,
I can tell you from personal experience, I was broken into recently, and nothing was done about it. Not a pin was even lifted with regard to a report or anything.
Now that's a fairly common experience for Houstonians right now, and the problem is it raises the anxiety. I mean, if you feel like nothing's going to happen, then people become more fearful of crime, and part of the problem with public safety is the perception of how we feel about it. And we had this horrific crime where the fellow that owned the Cadillac dealership down in Midtown was coming back from a night on the town, and he was ambushed in his garage and killed as he was going back into his house. That makes people think, well, maybe I shouldn't go out. And then that makes the restaurants not as full. I mean, this is a very dangerous spiral that you head down, and we've seen it in some of the big cities in the East and the Midwest.
Well, speaking of unacceptable, I'm switching on you. Let's go back to potholes, because I think these potholes are unacceptable. And we passed a drainage fee a couple of years back, and it was supposed to address our infrastructure issues, and it's not. And I want to get your opinion on this, because I'm getting pretty mad about all this.
Yeah, so you're talking about the Rebuild Houston program, and it was
You could tell I'm not a fan.
It was a flawed model from the beginning. The revenue model didn't work. We set up this new drainage fee that we're not collecting as much as we thought. There are tremendous costs associated with it. We went to this pay-as-you-go model, which was supposed to be some kind of a conservative idea, but everybody told us it wouldn't work at the time, and sure enough, it's not worked. Because you end up with those projects costing so much more by the time that you build them, you'd be much better off to borrow the money and do them up front. But here's what Rebuild Houston was really all about, if you want to know the truth of the matter. For 180 years in this city, we did infrastructure projects in a certain way. We had bond elections, and in those bond elections, the voters got to decide which projects were going to be done and how much money was going to be spent on those projects. Rebuild Houston was an effort to turn all that decision-making process over to a small handful of engineers and bureaucrats so they could make those decisions behind closed doors at City Hall and take it away from the voters. Anytime somebody tells you, I want to take the politics out of something, run the other direction, because what they're telling you is we really don't want the people to have a vote on these things. Well, of course, we now know the Supreme Court yesterday ruled that the ballot language was misleading as a matter of law, and so we now have this whole thing up in the air on top of not getting anything done. So this has just been a disaster. This has done more to set back the development of infrastructure in this city than anything else in the city's history.
So what does that ruling really mean? I mean, now that they're saying the language was not acceptable or whatever they just said, does that mean that the actual program is we can't enforce it? We weren't really doing it anyway, but does it mean we have to go back and reword it and then put it back to the voters? What does that mean?
And what happens in the interim with the money that has been raised?
Yeah.
And what's happening?
Well, that's all. Those are all great questions, and nobody knows the answer to them. What it almost certainly means is the charter amendment's going to go away, because when you look at what the court said, they're going to end up saying that the election was invalid, which means that the charter amendment that we passed was invalid. But here's the ironic thing, and this is the position that the city took yesterday. they're saying that they're entitled to assess and collect the drainage fee regardless of what the election outcome was, because they have that power under state law. So you could end up with really the worst of all possible worlds. You could end up with a drainage fee in place, but without any of the protections about how the money was supposed to be spent that were included in the charter amendment.
Is there any oversight or accountability on these funds at all?
There is a committee that's called an oversight committee. Their name was later changed to an advisory committee. And basically all these decisions now are made in Public Works about what projects are going to be prioritized. And let me just give you an example of the kind of thing that goes on down there. So we're scheduled under the current CIP, the Capital Improvement Plan, to widen Gessner in 2017 and 2018. Now, I've driven down Gessner recently. It's a perfectly good street. If you widen that street, you're going to have to take out, many, many mature trees. You're going to take out people's front yards. It doesn't need to be widened. And the people in that area are adamantly opposed to it being widened. Mm-hmm. So why are we doing that project as opposed to going out and fixing the streets in Garden Villas where you can barely drive down the streets? But somebody at City Hall's making those decisions as opposed to having to go to the voters and asking them, we want you to support a bond election, and here's the projects we're going to do. If you're afraid to go to the voters, then there's something wrong with what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I always say follow the money. So there's some incentive there that people are making these decisions, and I guess nobody knows.
Well, Memorial Green has been paused, recently too. They've changed they've put the lot restrictions down, so how many townhouses can be built in that area and such. But they're still going to put up all those multi-use business.
Okay, Bill. So you're elected tomorrow. What changes would you make in Public Works?
Well, I think it needs to be sort of just turned upside down and start all over. I mean, anybody in this town that's in the construction business or building business knows how difficult it is to get building permits out of the city of Houston. It's a universal complaint, everybody you talk to, and it's just not service friendly. And I think it's a leadership personnel issue. But on top of that, I think we need to go back to the model that worked for 180 years. We need to go back to having bond elections and have people vote on what projects are going to be done, in what order, and how much money we're going to spend on those projects. We need to get back to letting the people decide what infrastructure we need, not engineers and bureaucrats.
Yeah, and of course, talk about we've talked to every person who's in city council now and people who are seeking that office about the permit process, because it has really gotten to be a quagmire down there, and I'd like to see something done like day one.
Even researching, from my position, even researching information that's going on in Houston. There's a lot of people that don't have the software that I have. I can look at GIS formats, but just to understand where the growth is and what is happening is almost impossible. And that should be public information. It should be readily accessible to us. That's our tax dollars.
Do you think you have a lot of apathy with voters, and they just say you can't fight City Hall, so we're just they just capitulate?
Well, when you have situations like what happened yesterday where, the people voted on this, the Supreme Court comes in and says that the election was invalid, and the mayor basically says, well, it doesn't really matter, we're going to do what we want to anyway, I think that does cause voter apathy. And one of the problems is in recent city elections, the voter turnout's been about 15 or 20%, and that's just abysmal. But I'm going to tell you, traveling around on the campaign trail, I sense something different's going on in this election. I hear people I think are a lot more concerned about the direction of the city. And, the thing that they talk about a lot are the potholes that they drive across. But, of course, that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's the immediate manifestation.
That's the systemic, how it visualizes.
Of the financial problems we've got and the management problems we've got. And I think you're going to see a much higher turnout this time because I think people are genuinely concerned about the direction the city's going.
For political junkies like me, this is a fascinating race because you have like 1 million people running. I think the only people not running are the rest of us in this room. And so let me ask you from a political standpoint, because I've always said that you have a certain defined base more so than your opponents. And I think that's going to be key to getting you in the runoff. How do you see your path getting to victory? I mean, do you see it the same way, or do you feel that you have a defined base more than your opponents? How do you feel that you distinguish yourself enough from the voters to get into the runoff and become the next mayor?
Well, certainly various groups in town are inclined to vote different ways. But I have to tell you, when I go around and talk about potholes And when I talk about, the police department only solving 8% of the burglaries, when I talk about the fact that the city hasn't balanced its budget in 15 years, notwithstanding we've been going through the biggest oil and gas boom in my lifetime, when I talk about the fact that we're now $20 billion in debt, which is more than Detroit owed, by the way, when it filed bankruptcy, I find that resonates with people from every political persuasion, every background, every ethnicity. I mean, there's nobody that's in favor of potholes. There's nobody in favor of burglars. And there's nobody in favor of their property taxes going up. Yeah. And we've just seen these taxes and fees go up so dramatically in the last 5 or 6 years. And I just think people are fed up with it.
Yeah, well, a lot of that is an awareness issue, but it's not an issue unless it becomes an issue for you. And so once it's something like they get burglarized, or they ruin their brand new Porsche on that pothole and broke the front axle, and then it becomes an issue for them.
Right, but those of us that don't drive Porsches, if we had a better structure for mass transit, then that would probably alleviate some of the wear and tear that's on the roads as well.
Yeah, I think that look, Metro's ridership is down significantly. We need to do a better job in that area. This is fortunately, unfortunately, from your viewpoint, is going to be a rubber tire system because we're so spread out. It's the only thing that you can do economical. The park and ride system is a good system. It could be expanded and could be enhanced so we get more riders there. But let me tell you, you're talking about the guy with the Porsche hitting the pothole. I was talking to a lady the other day who was a school teacher that hit a pothole, taking her kids to school, single mom, and it made all of them late to school, so she had to go in and write and everything. And then the real problem is, she didn't have the $500 to go get her car fixed. For working families, this is not just an inconvenience. This can be a financial crisis in their lives. And for the city to be standing by and not doing anything about it and creating that risk is just not fair.
Yeah, and there's really no recourse from the city either, because I know people who have tried. They've hit a pothole, bent their rims, and they're looking at $500 would be cheap. They're talking about 2 brand new tires. That alone is probably $500, and then 2 new rims or something.
And the
like
loss
that
of time,
And so it's it sounds kind of silly about talking about potholes, but it is a big issue. But again, it's systemic of what's wrong with the city. Is that we're not putting our money where it should go. Well, you know what? We're coming up against a break again. Time flies when you're having fun. So we will be right back.
Welcome back to the Real Estate Rat Pack Radio Show with Chris, Joe, and Rob. The crew is taking your calls, so dial in at 1-800-808-5548.
And we are back. We're here with Jackie Bally and Samantha Merritt and mayoral candidate Bill King, and we're talking about Houston infrastructure. And this is a subject we could probably talk the next several days. And I understand that you're going to actually make that part of your show tomorrow, Jackie.
Yes, I just saw the topics our producers selected, and they want to talk about that controversial ruling.
Well, evidently it's
Shocker.
a big news. What? We don't even have a clue as what the impact of that decision is, do we?
No, we really don't. The only thing that I think is virtually certain is that the results of that election are going to be overturned, which means that we're not going to have the charter amendment that basically set out the structure of how this fund was supposed to work and how the money was supposed to be sent. The city is taking the position that it has the statutory authority under a different law to impose the drainage fee so that they can keep collecting the drainage fee even though that charter amendment goes away, which kind of begs the question, why did we have an election at all?
If they had that authority, it really is a puzzle. As I guess that way they said, well, we did put it out to the voters, because I remember voting against it.
But where's that money going now?
It goes to a lot of things. Some of it's spent on infrastructure. They're also using it to basically balance the general fund budget. They're now paying for 550 people out of that fund, and some of those people are working on streets. A lot of them are not.
So, when you're talking about funds, I would like to talk about unfunded pensions, if you would like to talk a little bit about that.
I think he's the king of talking about it.
He is the king about it, and so I want to kind of get your take on that. Is what are we facing, and what type of liabilities are we looking at, and can we solve the problem?
Well, certainly we can solve it. Our pension plans were in pretty good shape as late as the year 2000. There are 3 defined benefit pension plans at the city, one for the police, one for the fire, and one for everybody else. And every year we have actuaries study the plans to determine whether or not the money we've set aside is sufficient to make all the payments on the benefits that have been earned through that date. So as late as 2000, the actuaries said we had set aside enough money to do that. But in 2001 and 2002, there were some very significant increases to the benefits, which dramatically increased the liabilities that we owed, and nobody put any money in to compensate for that. So we went from being fully funded in 2000 to the end of 2003. We owed the pension plans $2.5 billion.
I'm confused. We actually increased the benefits, but we didn't put any money aside to pay for those benefits. So how did that happen?
It seems we increased the force also, the police force. There was a huge addition there a few years ago.
Yeah. So yeah, it's the city agreed to it. It's been written into state law now, which is part of the problem. But this was a situation where you had people down there voting on this that didn't understand the implications. So, for example, before 2000, there wasn't a COLA in the pension plans. And so they said, oh, look, we give a 3% COLA. It's only 3% a year. What's the big deal? Well, when your assets are only earning maybe 8 or 9%, then suddenly you've taken away a third of the earning power of the assets. And so when you run that over a very long period of time, it has a very dramatic impact. And unfortunately, the people running the city at the time didn't understand that. Once you get behind on these plans, it becomes very difficult to ever catch up, because you're not only have to pay what you owe, but what would have been earned on those assets. So essentially, you're financing this at like 8.5% interest. So we're now $4.5 billion behind on the plan.
So we're exponentially increasing it each year.
Right. And where the rubber really meets the road.
The compounding, yeah.
Now, where the rubber really meets the road on this is the amount of money you have to set aside to put into those plans, which goes up the more you owe. So in 2000, we were putting $100 million a year in. Last year, we were supposed to put in $400 million, which, by the way, was about 45% of all the property taxes that the city of Houston collected. By 2020, it will take more than half of the property taxes the city collects just to fund these plans. So this is not sustainable in the long run.
So basically, the rubber hit the road, but the road had a pothole in it. That's what I'm hearing.
Well said.
Well, so tell me, you're in office day one, and what do we do to fix that?
Well, we have to come up with a plan that migrates us from defined benefit to defined contribution plans. This is what was done in private industry 20 or 30 years ago. Government's just, in its typical fashion, running well behind the curve. I'm not one that favors changing the benefits for existing employees, because I think, a deal's a deal. We told them we were going to provide these benefits. They provided us their service. We can't give back the years they've given us. So I think we've got to honor those promises. But to continue to make these promises to new employees is just grossly irresponsible, and it will ultimately undermine not only the financial stability of the city, but also the plans themselves. This is a bad deal for the employees and for the taxpayers.
Yeah. Now, I understand that some of this can't be fixed unless we go to the state legislature to fix it. Well, tell me what that mechanics of that is.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a red herring issue, frankly. These laws,
I like those kind of issues.
Yeah, these laws have been written into these pension plans have been written into state law, in large measure because the state doesn't trust city council to manage these things, and there's some argument for that, I guess. But when I go and talk to the leadership in Austin, they say, look, you come up here with a comprehensive plan to solve this problem, and we'll sit down and work something out. But that nobody from the city of Houston has come up here with any kind of a comprehensive plan. They'll come up with little fixes and so forth, but come up here with a broad coalition of Houstonians that say they want to change these plans, and we'll figure out something that works.
Well, I agree with you. I think once you make a deal, you make a deal, and just figure out how you're going to fund it. And it doesn't seem like we've got anybody or anything that's kind of heading that direction at all right now.
In the last 5 years, in the last 5 years, we've gone an additional $1 billion in debt to the pensions.
Well, so everybody's been kicking the can down the road.
Correct.
Essentially, so if you get in as mayor, typically you're going to be there for 6 years. So I can kick that can long enough so the next mayor's going to get somebody. Sooner or later the music's going to stop, and there's going to be a chair missing.
So tell me, why do you want this job?
Right.
Okay, so let's switch, because You brought up something very interesting, something that we actually do in our city, Sugar Land, and in Fort Bend. We do have referendums. We do let the voters decide. And HISD, they are more prone to having referendums and bonds. I wanted you to talk a little bit about the latest round with that. I know this is not an HISD position, but the next mayor will be working with the largest school district. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the last HSD bond is an interesting case study to look at because I co-chaired that campaign with the tutors, and it was a $2 billion bond. It was the biggest school bond ever considered by the voters in the state of Texas, and it was basically to rebuild almost all the high schools inside the HISD, and it required a tax increase. And there was a lot of discussion about how to present that, and I said, look, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the voters and taxpayers of HISD, and we're going to say we need more taxes to rebuild these high schools. I'm sorry, but they're in terrible shape, and if we don't do something about them, they're going to drag down the neighborhoods around them. I wouldn't send my kids to these schools. You wouldn't send your kids to these schools, and it's something that we as a community need to do. And you know what? 70% of the voters of HISD agreed with that, including, by the way, every Republican box in the city. Now, contrast that with the Rebuild Houston program, where we're scared to go to the voters and tell them that we need more money for infrastructure. I'll tell you that the voters will give you money for infrastructure if they're convinced that it's really going to be spent to fix these problems, and then if you're not wasting money on other things. But when the city's got $75 million a year in overtime, when we're running a crime lab, when the Harris County has the duplicate service and is dying to have our business, they're not going to give you more tax money.
Well, we had a flood about a week or so ago. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And, I've talked with some people that have more information than I. We actually was part of that Brays Bayou, coming out of the banks. And I understand there's actually 7 lakes that are hooked to that system, but the Brays Bayou is not hooked to it yet. And we could have mitigated or eliminated that flood altogether. And so talk a little bit about why didn't we fund that piece?
Yeah, so you're talking about the Willow Waterhole
right.
reservoirs. Yeah, that's a great project, by the way. It not only has a lot of flood mitigation benefits, but it's also just going to be a beautiful. It's going to be an incredible. This is going to be Houston's new Central Park once it's all finished. It's going to be gorgeous. And there's some folks out there that are just doing an incredible job working on that project. It was not finished, and there could have been some overflow go into those lakes that would have mitigated the flooding to some degree. But I'll tell you the biggest problem in this particular flood, and by the way, Mayoral was the worst area, but there were probably a dozen areas around town, all the way down to Clear Lake and Kingwood, that flooded.
We got 12 inches in Sugar Land.
There were a lot of flooding problems around town because we're basically not doing any flood projects.
But we didn't flood because we have good infrastructure.
Yes,
but I digress. Sorry.
Yes.
But Mayoral, that Brays Bayou is mostly flooded because there's a project called Project Brays that's going to redo the profile of Brays Bayou through that entire area. And there's about 1.5 miles of that hadn't been finished because we haven't been able to get the federal funds to wrap it up. And I haven't seen a single person from the city up lobbying to get that money. I see them up lobbying for light rail money and all kinds of other things, but why aren't they up there, pounding the table about finishing that project so these people are not flooded anymore? My God, they've been flooded 2 or 3 times in the last 20 or 30 years. Enough's enough.
And they are up in arms, and of course there's talk about, the buybacks from FEMA and things like that in Mayoral, and what's going to happen to Mayoral. I don't think that's going to happen. I think they tried to do that with Willow Bend, and that didn't work.
Well, but all the flood laws just changed. I mean, people's flood insurance is dramatically more expensive too. So, and that's one of the areas that it wasn't. Some of those neighborhoods weren't necessarily in a flood zone, but because of the way the infrastructure is set up, they're now completely flooded.
And when you talk about politics and real estate, this is exactly why it's so important to talk about. They are hand in hand because what the decisions that the city makes hugely impacts real estate.
Everything involves real estate.
Go look at the real estate values in Detroit.
Hey,
that was good.
I think you still buy one for $1 up there.
I think they're giving them away.
But they do have a really nice light rail system.
So,
leave it to more industry, though. We've got our med center. We have more than just the automobile industry feeding Houston and making Houston thrive.
Yeah, well, our number one industry now is healthcare. And so we've kind of diversified from that, oil-based economy. Of course, if oil goes down, we are going to.
But let me. I think there's a little bit of hubris because I've gone back and read the newspaper stories about Detroit. By the way, in 1950, the population of Detroit was 1.9 million people. It was almost as big then as Houston is now. And you read the stories, and it was, there was no end to their prosperity and growth, and they were the new third coast there on the Great Lakes. But over many decades, they made a decision that they were not going to invest in infrastructure, that they were not going to put enough police officers on the street to make the city safe. They kept making unsustainable pension promises, not balancing the budget, and they started increasing taxes. They put in a drainage fee. Sound familiar?
All this.
They put in a garbage fee, which is currently being proposed. They put in a municipal income tax, and people said, you know what, I'm leaving. And the population went from 1.9 million down to 600,000 people.
Well, we're going to pick up there,
years.
but right now we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back.
Start to spread. Fancy.
Welcome back to the Real Estate Rat Pack Radio Show with Chris, Joe, and Rob. The crew is taking your calls, so dial in at 1-800-808-5548.
And we are back, and this is our final segment. We're here with Jackie Bally, Samantha Merritt, and mayoral candidate Bill King, and we're talking about Houston and Houston future. So, and on the break, because sometimes our break conversation would make great radio, I think. So we need to start, broadcasting that as well. We were talking about the police, and you had said a number a while ago that really concerned me, that we have 300 less officers now. Our population is growing pretty rapidly. What's our fix here?
Yeah, so if you go back 10 years ago, we were spending $450 million on the police department. That budget's doubled in the last 10 years to $900 million, yet we have 300 fewer police officers. So that's a management problem.
Can we touch on that population growth a little bit too? You probably see behind closed doors a lot more than we do, and what I'm curious about is how do you think growth will really be in 15, 20 years here in Houston? Do you think that the numbers are as accurate as they're projecting, that we'll have 15, 20 million?
Candidly, I'm a little skeptical that the growth is going to be as robust as the projections are, but look, there's no question this is still America's city of opportunity. People come here to make a new life for themselves from all around the country and all around the rest of the world. It's a great, welcoming city. We got this huge heart to take people in. Bob Lanier used to say, "Here, nobody cares who your daddy is."
I love that.
It's so true. And so I think we're going to see a lot of growth. But the thing to remember is the city itself is not growing very much. It's the area outside the city that's growing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's I think that's the marketplace telling you something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you get areas like the Woodlands where actually it's in spring where the Exxon campus is, and Darko and all that.
Sugarland.
And Sugarland. We don't want to leave out Sugarland, Jackie. And so you've got a lot of people out there also moving out there, and of course Houston's 637 square miles, and so you've only got so much city. I mean, they have to go somewhere. So I understand why there's suburban growth as opposed to urban growth. But I think we have a really great opportunity now, if we can fix some things, to have some great growth inside our limits.
We've actually got a lot of vacant land inside the city.
Yes.
I don't think that's a good statement.
So where is all that vacant land?
But they can go build. Developers can go out and build these little perfect micro mini communities. It's a clean slate of land outside there, and they can create whatever they want without having to go through a lot of the politics that they go through with rebuilding. Inside of Houston and retro building, basically.
And the permitting problems. I mean,
yes,
about for every building permit issued in the city of Houston, there's about 10 issued in the county.
Wow. That's a big number. That's a big number.
And I can tell you that there's a dramatic difference from rebuilding, new construction permits and remodeling permits. There's a lot of the homes that I've worked on that, are effectively a brand new home, but we call it a remodeled home just because we don't have the 8-9 months of money to have carrying costs for the new construction.
And of course, some of it was due to historic districts that were established during this administration, and of course,
yes.
That has not always been in a very egalitarian way that has been done. You have an opinion about that?
Well, the historic districts, look, I think maintaining some of our history is an important thing, but I think that the historic districts have been used as sort of a backdoor zoning, to tell you the truth of the matter, in a lot of instances. And I think we need to be, I think we need to be very careful about that. You know, people complain a lot about Houston not having zoning, but it's one of the reasons why we have this incredibly dynamic city that reinvents itself constantly, and I'd hate to see us lose that.
Yeah.
But I also do hate to see us lose a lot of our culture and a lot of the older things that, you know, we've got around town. Tearing everything down for new all the time isn't always the right thing to do. So,
yeah, well, I'm all for preserving history, but sometimes they're just old houses and old buildings. You know, they're not really historically significant of any effect, but because it's in that district, you're going to save it. It's like, really?
Or deem how it can be saved.
Yeah, and then, of course, you're demonized. You come out and say, you know what, we really need to redo this or tear it down. And of course, the people who want to preserve it go, oh, they're terrible people. It's all about the money. No, it's not all about the money. It's about creating a great city.
Well, it is about the money. I mean, there's ROI.
Oh, Samantha, come on. I'm trying to look altruistic here.
But I do want to say, too, that, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing you on Thursday, on June 25th at HAR.
Yeah, we have a Mayoral Forum for the realtors on June 25th at River Oaks Country Club. I think it may already be sold out. I'm not sure. I think it'd be a really good attendance, and I think all the candidates will be there. And I expect we'll have a very robust discussion about these issues, especially Rebuild Houston.
Yeah, that's going to be a good
It's not a quiet crowd, that's for sure, I can tell you.
So, taking into consideration your opponents, tell me how you distinguish yourself from the sea of sameness out there.
Well, I'm taller and better looking. No, I think that when you look at the field, I'm really the only businessman in the race. Everybody there, not everybody, but most of the candidates are people who have made their living in politics. That's their calling card. There's a couple that's not the case, but most of these people have held elective office for some of them basically their entire life. There's nobody that's got the management experience that comes to this. I'm also the only candidate in the race that has zero political ambitions beyond this office. I'm not going to be running in a Republican or a Democratic primary when I get done here and have to worry about, you know, how everything I do is going to look through those optics. The only reason I'm doing it is I love this city. You know, I don't want to lose this incredible city of opportunity that I grew up in and that gave me the opportunities that I had. I want my kids and grandkids to have that same kind of city. And I am just really concerned that we're going down a direction that we're going to lose that if we don't change the direction we're going.
Talk a little bit about your business background, because we didn't really touch on that very much.
Yeah, you have it legal and corporate and, you know, politics too.
Yeah, so I've been in a lawyer and businessman here in town for the last 40 years. I started out in the real estate and savings and loan business in the early 80s.
Wow.
And made a lot of money and then lost all of it.
I think actually your story is just quite impressive because people don't realize that either.
Well, it's kind of Houston's story.
Exactly.
I mean, I fell completely on my face in the 1980s, had lost everything, had to start completely over. And the great thing about this city is people all over, my friends said, okay, fine, you fell on your face, get up, dust yourself off, and get back into the game. And it's a city that gives you the opportunity to do that. I don't think there's many cities like that in the country. And then I went off and got involved in other businesses and eventually ran a pretty large national company for about 10 years, and we sold that company. But I think it's given me a unique perspective because I've had both the public side and the private side. I chaired the hurricane evacuation force to redo the hurricane evacuation plans for Governor Perry. I've been on the Transportation Policy Council for HUC. I had the experience at KEMA. I've been really involved with the schools here, but I've also had that business experience of having to make a payroll, you know, having to pay back money, and I just think
you have a strong background in aviation.
Right.
I mean, I think with someone with your background, it's hard to really talk about everything because he's been involved in every policy area. And like I said, I've known him 20 years. He's been involved in every policy area that could impact our city that entire time that I've known him.
That does give you a very unique perspective.
But let me ask you, with all of that and all your great success, what are some of you keep thinking Houston as a whole, but what are some of the things that you think you do personally to add to your success or to keep yourself grounded?
Well, I think there's a number of things. Frankly, I learned a whole lot more from my failures than I did my successes, and I think most people will tell you that. when everything's going right, it's real easy to think that, you're the most brilliant person and you don't make any mistakes. When you have to deal with failure and really examine what you did and what you did wrong, I think it makes you a really stronger, better person. There's no saying that adversity breeds character, and I think that's true. But I will say I think I've got all the character I need at this point.
That makes me quite a character, too.
Hopefully I'm done with the adversity part of my life at this point in time. But I think it also is having the intellectual honesty to come to these issues without a preconceived notion about, what you think. So many times what I see in the public policy area is people have an opinion, and then they go out and try to find facts that support that opinion, and they ignore all the facts that contradict it. I think we got to start with the facts and see where those lead us in these public policy. And I think if you're intellectually honest and do that, it leads you sometimes to places you didn't expect for it to lead you to. I know on the immigration issue, that's where I ended up being. I sort of had an opinion about it, and after I sort of studied it for a while, I came out a very different place, and I thought I was going to be on that.
Bill have an opinion. I don't think I'd really would hear that. I want to say one thing. I want to say thank you for putting yourself out there and for doing this, because a lot of people don't realize how time-consuming and what it takes away from your personal life and your professional life when you decide that you do want to be a candidate, especially of a city this large. So I do want to say thank you, because you bring a lot to the table, and we appreciate the fact that you would like to see us grow in a more positive way. And you do have solutions, which is good, because a lot of people will tell you, like you said, what the problems are, but they don't really come up with the solutions, and you're doing both. So I appreciate that,
Well,
too.
thank you for saying that. Going around the campaign trail, it is exhausting, but at the same time it's exhilarating, because you talk to these people who have sort of the same love for the city that we all do, and you find people doing these incredible things in the private sector and in charity and in public life, and you realize there's a lot of other people that love the city as much as we do.
Well, we're kind of running out of time, so Samantha, you got an additional
I was
question?
just going to actually touch on charity. I was going to ask you, if there's any systems in place now that you particularly like or care for, would like to see advanced.
Well, this has got to be one of the most generous cities in the United States. I've worked with a lot of different organizations. Interfaith Ministries has been one of my passions, but Crime Stoppers, the Firefighters Foundation, Galveston Bay Foundation. We've got all these tremendous charities that if you want to get involved in the city, there's plenty of places to do it. And there's a gala night, and hundreds of people show up, and they raise hundreds of thousands, not millions of dollars every night in the city. It's incredible, the generosity of this city.
So what one message, we're getting really on a short time here, what one message would you like to leave our listeners with?
We need to fix the streets, catch the crooks, balance the budget. We got to get this city back to basics.
All right.
And don't forget to vote.
And don't forget, yes, please get out and vote. So Jackie Bally,
yes,
I really appreciate you being here, and I hope you'll come back sometime.
I will.
And Samantha, always lovely to have you. And Mr. King, I wish you the best of luck on the campaign trail. And if you'd like to come back in the fall, we would love to have you.
Well, as long as you have beautiful women on the show, I will be back.
You hear that? You hear that, Chris and Joe? So we until next week, we're out of here.
That's right.
And you've been listening to the Real Estate Rat Pack. The question is, who's Frank, who's Sammy, who's Dean, and who's the other guy?
Chris is Frank,
I'm
he's
Dean.
Dean, and I'm Sammy. Yes, he's Dean. That's right. Yeah.
So tune in to the really big show every Saturday at 9 a.m. right here on 100.7 The Word, KKHT.